hopefully going to be able to hang on. I'm going to try and, can you guys still see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So I think that since I'm not on the TV, I'm going to try and see it on my other screen. Yeah, that'll work. Cool. Okay. So like I said, we're talking about increasing buyer efficiency. I think that one of the biggest complaints that I heard over the past 6 or 8 months or whatever that I've been here is that buyers are just eating up an immense amount of time, as they do. And we've all heard the kind of the old adage that buyers are liars. I think that most of the time that tends to be that we have either missed something or not asked the right questions. So we're just going to start off. The one, oh, okay, I can click through. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a couple of like case studies, and then we're going to go back through and have some talking points. So one of the things that I used to run in all the time is a buyer sending you, because of course they don't just watch their portal, even though I'm sure that you've explained to them that that's going to catch everything on the MLS. And maybe they're sending you Zillow pre-foreclosures or their ABOs or contingents, or they're just a house that really doesn't exist. And so for me guys, what is your kind of go-to discussion when that happens, where they're sending you all sorts of things that either don't exist or are off the market? Is there any go-to conversation that you have when your buyers are sending you stuff like that? And if not, I'll fill mine in. The chat that I tended to have when we first started off in our buyer consult, I think that your buyer consult, which we'll talk about a little bit later, sets the tone for a lot of these. And I let them know, just I think having an understanding of how the different sites work, that realistically Zillow is not going to be any different than Trulia. That isn't going to be different than Realtor.com will be different. But the rest of the sites all just feed from the MLS. However, I like to remind them that Zillow is also like the Wikipedia of real estate, right? So anyone can edit it. You can go on and put your own home on. If you claim a listing as the owner, you can change it even without changing the MLS. So I'd like to know, we have a basic chat about Zillow pre-foreclosures that really they aren't pre-foreclosures. They're just somebody that's been reported to the credit bureau as missing a payment. Probably will never come up. And Zillow foreclosure listings, I'll let them know. A lot of times they will pop up, and I tell them to check how long it's been on Zillow, because a lot of times you'll see that this has been on there for 1,052 days, and we know that that's really, really not the case. I also explained that the way that some of the MLSs feed ABO is, we all know at this point, is basically pending. And we also know that basically contingent continue to show is to some degree pending. So having an explanation of those can be very helpful. But I think those are a couple tips to handle there. What about a buyer is kind of consistently, Kim and I talked about this the other day, a buyer is consistently kind of rejecting homes that you know are in their criteria range. Maybe they say, oh, well, that just doesn't fit, or, oh, I'm holding off for something a little bit nicer. Do you guys run into that? And what's an answer that you have for that?
I think sometimes just asking them if their parameters have changed. And, this just came to me while you were talking. It's like maybe we should check to see if we're searching for the same thing. Like if they're going on to Zillow and using different search criteria that they gave to you, then, maybe you need to change yours. I don't know. That's just a thought.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. And I think that, so one of the things that's helped me out in the past is I've got the save search, and you can set it to BCCU when a new listing comes up. What I actually have instead is, because I know that clients are going to be on Zillow looking for outside of their range, realistically, I have a search set up for myself that is a little bit wider than theirs. So let's say that they only want to be in Clark, and they tell you, don't show me anything that's not in Clarkston schools that's above 375,000 that has to have a basement and this and that. I might I might go a couple miles outside of Clarkston schools, and I might have up to 400,000 and maybe with or without a basement, so that when they're looking outside that criteria, I've probably already seen it, so I'm not shocked by anything. And I've noticed a lot of times they'll be sending you something and they don't realize that it's outside of their criteria, because they might be looking on Zillow, but they didn't realize that, oh, it's actually not in that school district, or, oh, it doesn't have a basement. And so if you are too quick on the trigger to jump and say, yeah, let's go see that, and then you show up and they say, oh, it doesn't have a basement, never mind, I don't want this. So I think that's absolutely correct. I think the other thing that can be happening is the buyer has, and I think this kind of ties in with the next one, is the buyer can be unrealistic about the price range. The buyer may just have a wrong idea of what is available for them, or they may just be having a preconceived notion about what they may be able to get. So this is especially true if you're dealing with relocation. If you have somebody that is coming from, nowhere in Iowa, they may think that they may be having, a $400,000 budget, and they were able to get a, beautiful 3,000 square foot new construction that they can't get here. Or they may be the opposite, where they're coming from Portland and they can get far more. So especially when you're dealing with relocation, having the conversation of what does your market that you're coming from look like, and maybe doing some Zillow research on your own to take a look. I think that can help a lot. I think another sticking point when you run into constant rejections of their criteria are, have you missed something in there? Is there something that is just off of what you're looking for? So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. Price range, I really think, is just strictly an education issue. We will actually, if we're sitting in a buyer consult, we will actually show them, here are some examples of houses that are in this price range. Is this kind of what you're thinking? And we talk about the kind of pillars of our home search, right? Which are location, amenities, size, and price, right? Those are kind of the basics. And we discuss which of these are, which is the most malleable, right? And which are the most rigid. Price tends to be obviously the most rigid of the bunch, but not always. So this is one that we run into a lot. Oh, shoot, I got to go somehow back. There we go. I've run into it where buyers tend to be very positive about every house they show, but just they keep saying, well, I like it, but just not enough to make an offer. You guys run into that at all? Or is there a particular response that you like when you run into that? All right. The conversation I've had at this point is, I look back, and again, some of it comes back to your criteria, but some of it is, okay, so what is it about this house that we say there's this barrier here, right? And okay, so what is it about this house that isn't enough, that it just doesn't check enough of your boxes? And sometimes you'll hear, well, it checks all the boxes, but, and which is when you've realized that you missed a box, right? So it has checked all the boxes that they've presented to you as criteria, and you realize you may have missed a box that you don't know needs to be checked. So that's when it's good to go back over the criteria and say, hey, I know that you've said we need 3 beds and 2.5 baths. We need at least 1,800 square feet. We need it to be in X location. And we know that we need this. Is there anything else that you might feel that you need to make, the perfect home, or to make this house your home? And I think that you'll find that you tend to be missing something. But again, not always. Or the other thing that you may have missed is you may miss buyer motivation. So if you have somebody that especially if they're seeing a lot of houses and are just not convinced of anything, look at the motivation to move. Are they, and that's another conversation we have in the consultation, is from a scale of 1 to 10, where are you on being ready to move right now, and what is making you move? So, and we'll go into the consult a little bit more, because I think that so many of these issues can be solved at the buyer consult, and can be, you can get ahead of a lot of issues. This one I know that I've seen, because you guys have told me, I'm not going to call out any of you because probably every one of you has had this conversation with me, and I'm sure with Kim. But buyers are willing to offer, but they're just not willing to offer competitively. So they either are not willing to, some of them will just say, well, I am not going to offer on a multiple offer scenario. Well, that doesn't make sense. And I explained to them multiple offers doesn't just mean you have to make a kind of a silly bid. You can still bid competitively. But does anyone have a really good, I always hate to say objection handling because that's not what we're doing. We're educating and clarifying. Does anyone have a really good clarification for somebody who is not willing to offer competitively?
Peter. JR.
Yes.
JR. Yes, I worked with a buyer for probably 9 months. Every time we saw the house that he wanted, and he was a vice president of a company, I'd suggest him a price, show him the competitive market, and he'd always go in, 4,000 or 5,000 under that. And I'd tell him, well, that's a good offer, but it's not competitive. And after about 6 or 7 purchase agreements that didn't go through, I finally convinced him that this was a few years ago, but he had to be over asking because everything was going over. And he finally did, and he got the house. So the very first time he took my suggestion seriously, I think it's just a learning curve for first people get out to see the house and what their money will buy. And he was nowhere near. He was looking in Birmingham and Farmington Hills, and he ended up buying a house in Macomb Township. And I told him the day I met him, he'd find it in Macomb Township because that was the best deal for his money.
So can you tell me what was that conversation like that got him over the hump of not only realizing that he needed to be competitive, but what was also the conversation like to realize that to get what he needed? Because again, for him, obviously the thing that ended up being flexible was locations. What were those two conversations like? The hey, we're getting serious about offering, and then also the hey, we now need to change the location pillar to suit our needs.
Well, when we first started, like I said, your best deal for your money, and you won't be any farther from work because he worked from home way back then. I said, it's Macomb Township. He says, no, there's no way I'm living in Macomb County. No way. So, you only can push a guy so far, right? So we're on the other side of town in Oakland County. And being who he was, a vice president, he knew more about real estate than I did. I couldn't convince him. I think just because he lost so many bids that, I said, look, let's go to Macomb. You've lost 3 or 4 or 5 over here in Oakland County. They're older homes you're looking at. They're all chopped up. We have more open space in Macomb. Let's go just give it a shot. And sure enough, is the first house I showed him in Macomb he bought. And he's still in it today. So I don't think you can convince him against his will, right?
Right. Yeah, and Kim just said in the chat, you convinced him by educating him in the market, and that's the absolute truth. But I think that you also bring up a really good point, which is number one, you can't beat them over the head to see what they need, right?
Right.
So Ninja always says it matters who says it, right? So when we've led them to the realization that this is their idea, because again, they always know more than we do. But I think the other thing that you brought up that without kind of saying it is sometimes we also have a perception problem. And sometimes that perception problem can only be solved by viewing. We used to run into it on the east side. We ran into it all the time in Chesterfield, New Baltimore. So there were people who lived especially people who were relocating back to Metro Detroit. They had this image of Chesterfield, New Baltimore as kind of run down and not really this great area, which may have been true 40 years ago, 35, 40 years ago, and is no longer true today. And I used to do the same thing, JR. I would just say, hey, let's go take a look there, drive through the neighborhoods, and let's see what you think. And I actually want to skip ahead for this before I go into a couple of these case studies, because I think it'll be helpful. A lot of these, sorry, it's a little bit weird going back. Shoot. Okay. So many of these go back to these 4 things of what a buyer's greatest fears are. Yeah, David, you're absolutely right. And he said that a lot of it does come down to buyer motivation. And you're absolutely right. As sometimes as time passes and that clock is ticking, and they realize, wait a minute, it's now winter and I haven't made a move, or hey, I now threw away $25,000 on rent. Yeah, that sometimes just that school of hard knocks to some degree can up the motivation. I think that's absolutely correct. The greatest fear is being, number one, losing the property that they're offering on. And so if you're addressing this, and we'll go over some specific kind of, not scripts, but some specific tips on that. Missing something that comes up, that'll come up in a couple of other buyer case studies. So hey, what if I offer on this and something comes up in the next month that is X? Of course, they're worried about paying too much, and of course, they're worried about issues with the property. And we'll go back to these in a minute here. But I wanted to just say, kind of keep those four things in mind as we, and maybe I should have addressed that first, but keep those four things in mind as we go through a couple more of these case studies here. I've seen this a lot, and I think that David has probably already answered this, that sometimes buyers they drop in and out of your life. They show up and they're like, hey, I want to see 10 houses tomorrow, and you show them houses for a week, and then you don't hear from them for 3 months, and then you hear from them again for a couple weeks, and they get real serious, and then you don't hear from them. And I think that can be one, an issue of motivation, and two, I think that can be an issue of that their circumstance just isn't in the right place for them to be able to figure out what they want right now. Sometimes that may be in their personal life, that they just, hey, maybe they've got something else going on. Their kids are taking up a lot of time. Sometimes we forget that real estate is the most important thing it's our everyday, and it isn't everybody else's. I think the other thing that can happen, this has happened to me several times, that they really, especially if you have somebody that can't find what they like in their criteria range, where maybe they're not rejecting every house that you show them, but you can just sense that they're not quite there. Maybe it's a financial issue, and maybe you need to discuss when you say, hey, I can't find what I like in this price point. Well, maybe we need to discuss with the lender. Is there something that's holding us back from being approved for more? Is there debt that's hanging around that maybe we can get rid of that will clear up some DTI? Is there a credit score that we can increase that can give us a lower interest rate that can make it more affordable? So I think sometimes too, it's their own circumstances, not so much just the market or even the market education, because they could be acutely aware of what's available in the market, but still it may not fit their needs because they may just not be able to afford what their criteria needs to be. And so sometimes, like JR mentioned, sometimes the remedy to not be able to afford what you need is changing location. I think that one of the ways that Oxford and to some degree Lake Orion grew, and even in some degrees Clarkston Independence, is you had folks that maybe they had a $300,000 or $400,000 budget, and they couldn't, and they wanted to live in Shelby or Rochester. Again, sorry, I have more East Side examples, but that's where most of my business was. And we said, okay, you can have an old house that needs a ton of updating for $400,000 in Rochester, and you can be exactly where you want. Or you can go out to Oxford, spend the same amount of money, maybe you drive 5-10 minutes more, and you get a brand new house. And so we had a lot of people that once they came to that location realization, it was really positive for them. And sorry, my mouse is like not wanting to cooperate. Dave, I'm gonna go into that. So I hate to cut that comment off, but that's a whole slide for me. So you're ahead of the game there. So we will go over that though. Well, a couple of quick things here that we should look at. When buyers have unrealistic demands on your time, and especially they don't kind of respect your boundaries, a lot of this goes to the expectations that you set. We're people too. I famously have, my 1 hour. You guys know I basically answer my phone all the time, but it's not always exactly 6:30 to 7:30. But I have like an hour that I sit down and have dinner, and that's an appointment time for me. And the Pope could be calling, or the president, or whoever, and I'm sorry, that's my phone is off. Just like I wouldn't pick up my phone in a listing consultation. And I explain that to, we explain that to clients and say, hey, I am as available as possible. I answer my phone far more than business hours. I answer my phone from X time to X time. If you message me after X, I will get back to you in X amount of time. I think that's extremely helpful because you've now set the X. Too many agents, I think, tell people, well, I'm available all the time and you can always get a hold of me every second of the day. And it's just not always true. You know, I've even for me, I've said, hey, I will get back to you within this amount of time. We're human beings too. And I would also let them know. I think sometimes too, we're afraid to tell them that we have personal things going on. Hey, I've got a wedding going on. Your clients, most of the time, unless the world's on fire, will respect that and say, hey, I'm not going to bother you. And so sometimes we put ourselves in those situations because we want to impart so much value to our clients that we don't realize that, okay, is the best thing actually for us to take a question at a wedding, or is it better to, hey, I'm going to say, hey, I'll get back to you in a couple hours or in the morning, and we'll address those concerns then. Of course, sometimes the world's on fire. I get it. And if you're like me, you'd rather put out that fire when it's small. One other one that I think that we see quite a bit is when buyers, they offer on, you get a call that says, hey, I went to an open house and I put an offer on the house. Or, hey, I saw it for sale by owner. Or, hey, I went over to a new construction development and I put an offer in. I know that that's happened. I've heard that. Any conversations that you guys have had when it comes to those? You guys just want to hear me talk. That's
Well, Peter, I'm not sure people realize, like, when they go to I always try to tell my client in a nice way, don't forget if you, the first thing a good agent will ask you in an open house is, do you have an agent? So just make sure that they realize that you have an agent. But I had a young couple bought a new construction and I really just went in and fought for my commission because I had worked with them for 2 months and they couldn't find anything on the market. So they said, we better go new. And they don't realize, they didn't tell me. They said, oh yeah, we went and signed the paper, blah, blah, blah. So they were nice enough. The construction, Pulte was nice enough to acknowledge that I was working with them and they gave me my commission, but it is a panic moment for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to two things. Number one is education on what these things are. So I actually pull back the curtain and I tell them, hey, when you go into an open house, there's a really, I number one, tell them why realtors do open houses. So they're looking for unrepresented buyers. I said, so if we've committed to each other, I said, here's a couple business cards, say, hey, here's my agent, and they won't bug you. I let them know that. And I also let them know, hey, there's a really good possibility that the agent that's holding this may not be the listing agent. They may not just be there to show the house. They may just be there. They may be there looking for buyers. I tell them with for sale by owners, I say, hey, we can work with for sale by owners. I tell them we have a one-party agreement. It's not uncommon for us to work with for sale by owners, and most for sale by owners understand that they are probably going to be paying a buyer's agent commission. And then I also educate them on new construction. Not only that, here's why you need a buyer's agent when you're doing new construction, because most people don't realize that. Oh, well, I've already found the house. Okay, well, that, as we know, has very little to do with it. And I also explained to them that some of these construction companies, I need to register you on their site before you go take a look. I may not have to go with you, but I need to know that you're going so that they know that you're working with me. And that comes down to a discussion. I know it's uncomfortable. It comes down to a discussion of how we get paid, right? And so I let them know, hey, just so you know, I'm not on salary. I only am paid by you. My services are free to you, but they are not free. And so I am paid by the listing brokerage, which is the correct case, at closing. If I don't make a dime before then. And I think that also helps, to have some understanding of what's going on. One of the last ones I want to go over is, and then we'll go through a little bit of the actual process of, all right, how can we avoid these case studies in the first place? So first, what if X comes on the market later? I know it is, if anybody's got a great one to this, I have heard this a million times. Anybody got a great, hey, what if something comes on the market in a month that I like more? Okay. So 10, David said, so will 10 others like it. Yeah, you may absolutely be right. And so that's absolutely correct. So maybe, hey, yeah, there will be ones that come on the market later that you may like. And so for me, it comes back to, I let them know, hey, are you happy enough with this house that you can delete the Zillow or Realtor or Portal app from your phone? And sometimes that answer is yes, sometimes it's no. But it's just like getting married, right? You know, are you happy enough with this person that you can stop, getting, if you're still on, what's the dating at Tinder or whatever, when you're married, you know that maybe that's not the right fit, right? And it's the same thing with your house. So are we happy enough with it to move on? This one I wanted to throw in here. We all know the answer to this, but I just want to see what's out there without being pre-approved. Sometimes the simple answer is no, right? You explain what the pre-approval does, that you absolutely will not be taken seriously. But sometimes this has happened where you've explained, hey, you won't be taken seriously, your offer won't be taken seriously, and they still say, yeah, you know what, you might be right, but I want to see what's out there. And the answer to that needs to be, I'm sorry, then you can do that with another agent, but that's where we say, okay, take a look on Zillow, drive the neighborhoods, go to open houses. But at this point, we're not in the portion that David's right. At that point, they're not motivated and they're not in the right stage of the buying process. So let's talk about that. So many of our problems come from not understanding where a buyer is in the process. So the first stage is, and these I explain this to them in their buyer consult. So part of this is almost of this class is having an efficient buyer consult as well. So the first is the curiosity phase or the dreaming phase. This can last anywhere from 18 months all the way up to years. I mean, I know people that have been in the curiosity phase for years. I know famously I've had a client that came in 2016 that I closed in 2021. It's wild. The curiosity phase, some big symptoms of that are, yeah, David, you're absolutely right. Your time is far too valuable for kind of the tire kickers. But just because they're a tire kicker now doesn't mean that they won't be a serious buyer in the future. So how do we keep them on the hook without kicking them to the curb and saying, sorry, you're a tire kicker, I don't have time for you? And I think helping them to understand that is where they are is really key. So I would sit down with them and say, hey, let's have a 30-minute conversation. We'll help you to understand the process. And even if you're not ready to buy right now, this may be helpful for you to understand what's going on. So this curiosity or the dream phase, this is when they're cruising Realtor.com and Zillow. They probably haven't actually talked to an agent yet, and they really don't know what they want. In my opinion, this is when they should have a buyer consult. Not always the case, but I think that's a great time if you've got somebody that kind of sends you Zillow listings here and there, to say, hey, we can have a Zoom meeting, but let's chat for 15, 20 minutes and help you understand what's going on. And once you understand that, you can give them the recommendations. Hey, just so you know, the way that we start our process is, for me, it was number one, you're looking online. And I think that COVID really changed this for a lot of people. They didn't want to go through 1 million houses. I think it might be going back a little bit, but they said, I don't want to go through 1 million houses to find my house. I want to shop from my couch. I want to know the right house for me. And I want to go see 3 houses and pick one like on HGTV, but they need to have that information in front of them on the couch. So we say, all right, we start online. We start reviewing things. We look at what's available in the area. And then we go to our kind of secondary search phase, which is we are in person, but we're not quite doing private showings. We're doing more of the generic searches. And that would be driving the neighborhoods, understanding, like JR mentioned of his client who didn't want to be in Macomb Township, maybe take a drive through some of those areas that you're not quite sure about. Maybe go to a couple open houses in the neighborhood. And then I let them know once we are ready, once we're at that 10 out of 10, hey, I'm ready to buy a house. That's when we start our private showings. And I let them know, hey, not only is it not just about our time, but that seller has a lot going on. You got a seller that's got kids that's trying to pack up their home so you can walk through for them to find out that, hey, I don't actually want to offer on anything. I let them know it's not just the buyer's agent's time. It's also an imposition on the seller. Number 2 is our interest phase. And that's, like I said, where we start. That's maybe when you contact an agent. This is when they're driving those neighborhoods and going to those open houses. And that and desire, I think, can be kind of intertwined but we really, when we start going to private showings, it needs to be stage number 4, commitment, which means not only that we're committed to buying a house, but you've committed to me. And I let them know that's why we have our buyer's agency agreement, right? And if you want it, I think I have a copy of, hang on, I'll see if I can pull it up real quick. But I had a great sheet that showed this is what I'm going to do for you, and this is what I expect in return. And I think that can be, sometimes we want to give and give and give without any commitment. And it just ends up being a bad, it's a bad look. It's a bad fit. Hang on, I'm going to change my screen here real quick because I want to show this to you guys. So this is, I call it my commitment form, and I show them, hey, I really appreciate you working with us. This is normally at the end of the consultation. Here's what we're doing for you. Here's everything that we're going to do. And then once I kind of explain that to them, I say, now here's what I expect from you, which is, hey, if you're going to go to an open house, you let them know that you're working with an agent. If you are going to go to a new construction, let them know that, or let me know in advance. So I think that can really help when you've asked for something in return, you've developed a kind of a symbiotic relationship. And I think that's important. I talked about buyer's greatest fears. All right, so let's talk a little bit here now about the specific process that is going to save you time and money and energy. The first is making sure that your buyers have clarity, have confidence, and have commitment. We just talked about commitment. Clarity is, I think, very, very important. And it is not only just clarity about what they want, but it's clarity about the process. And then that leads them to confidence in the process, right? We always say, hey, real estate transactions like a roller coaster. We're going to tell you where the hills and valleys are, strap you in as best we can. But helping them have clarity and understanding the process and in what they want, I think is really important. Now let's take the deep dive in. So in that buyer consultation, and when I say the buyer consultation, does it have to be you sitting in the office with them? I mean, ideally, yes. Sometimes this happens in a house. Sometimes it happens over the phone. It might happen over Google Meet. It might happen when you just meet them for the first time in a coffee shop. I don't know what that looks like, but what matters is the conversations and the questions that you're having. So like we mentioned, you want your biggest goal is number 1, to have them commit to you. And number 2, to understand what their needs are and their place in the process. Of course, we're going to build rapport, but we also want to educate them to get ahead of some of these case study problems that we've already addressed. And sometimes in the consultation, I'll actually go over a scenario like this. Hey, just so you know, we had a buyer that thought that they wanted X, and they really found out this. And in case you find yourself in this scenario, this is what you can do. I think if you only do a couple things in your consult, these are the couple things that you need to find out. The first is finding out their motivations and their situations. So do they have a house to sell? I think is one of the biggest. Do they have debt they need to clear? Do they have student loans that they need to understand? So understanding where are they now, and where do we need to be, and what do we need to do to get them there? Does anyone have any other specific things that they look for when it comes to a buyer's situation outside of, obviously we ask bankruptcies, foreclosures. I normally ask about student loans, fixed payments, and then any, houses to sell. Anything else that you guys ask that I might be missing? Covered it.
Well, on the what and why, are you talking specifically about what they want, their must have?
Yep. So that's my next thing is the what and the why. I actually did it as I had 2 sheets, and they had I'm sorry, that was with my must and wants. Sorry, let me talk about my must and my wants first, and then I'll talk about the what's and the whys. So I had a sheet, and I drew just a T on it, and I put must and want. And if I had let's say I've got two buyers. I've got Mr. Mrs. Buyer, Mr. Buyer. I have them separately do this. Because I think the other thing that you run into a lot, and maybe you don't even know it, especially when you're dealing with a couple or a family, is maybe husbands want and need list is different than the wife's, and they're clashing. And we want to find those conflict points right away, so that we don't run into this. Well, hey, husband really likes the house and wife is kind of iffy, and it may be a marital conflict that you're missing. And so I think that's really important. And I tell them to be very specific with their wants. So the musts are, do not ever show me a house that does not have this on it. And that's normally very objective. So it's, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. It's, hey, it must have a basement. It must this, whatever. And then our want list, I tell them to get very specific. Do you like solid surface flooring versus carpet? Do you like white cabinets instead of stained ones? Do you like, do you like tubs versus showers? I mean, we get very specific, and I say, even if it's just dream scenario, because it allows me to see your preferences. And then what we do then is we combine them. Yes. Yeah. David's absolutely right. Yeah. Do you have a plan B for short-term residents if your house sells before you close? I think that is wildly underrated when it comes to preparedness to sell. Is what we all know that we can offer with a contingency on our house selling. We also know that in this market that's very difficult to do. So sometimes we end up selling our house first. Yeah, what's your plan beforehand if it sells first? That's, I think, a great question to ask. And help them to understand what plans are available. Talk about occupancy. Sorry, back to the must-want list. I actually combine those together and we say, okay, where do we have discrepancies? Does husband like solid surface flooring and wife likes carpet? Where are those things? And then I ask them, which of these can we merge and which of these do we need to kind of hash it out and fight it out and say, okay, which one of these, is there a compromise? Can we settle for, hey, we're gonna look for carpet in the main areas and carpet the bedrooms and solid surface in the main area. But what it comes back to is there is nothing more important than the what's and the whys. Once I look at this must and the wants list, I go through every portion and we ask why. So 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. Well, why? I mean, it may be, and sometimes you'll get this stunned look that's like, well, what do you mean? Why do I want 3 beds? Because everyone wants 3 beds. Everyone wants a 4-bedroom house. Okay, well, maybe not. So is it that they have 2 kids? Is it that they have 1 child and they need an office space? I see this a lot when it's not necessarily going from 2-bedroom to 3-bedroom. It's usually going from 3 to 4 or 4 to 5. But normally that last bedroom isn't needed. In most cases, it's, well, we could do it with some other way. Peter Parnett from Ninja gives the classic what, why example. He said he had a client that he was working with forever who said, I want acreage. And they couldn't get him under contract, And one day they call him up and they say, hey, just so you know, we bought a house on the golf course. He's like, what are you talking about? A house on the golf course. He found out that they said, yeah, we had no rear neighbors and it had this, nice private lot. And he found out that they didn't want acreage. They wanted privacy. And so I would encourage you, when you're having these conversations, don't just have the conversation about what you want, have the conversation about what is the why behind it. What is the driving force for their location?
Also, a good question to ask, especially with first-time buyers, that are buying with another individual, is what kind of house did you grow up in? Because
Yes.
one grew up in a ranch and the other grew up in a 2-story, not even thinking about it, they have a preference. And that needs to be, just along with all the other things that you clarified, that also needs to be discussed. Otherwise, they're objecting to houses and they're not even aware that they're basically pre-programmed for one.
That is absolutely true. And so now this is going to get into the realm of silliness, but bear with me, okay? But in the realm of silliness, I kind of have joking conversations with people, but they're important. So for me, I'm 6'5". I'm not going to buy a bungalow in almost any scenario, right? It's 99% of the time it does not work for me. Also, even though I've got an older house, older houses tend to have shorter basements. That tends to be tough. So I kind of have conversations if I know that somebody, I also have the conversation, and I always joke about whether they're afraid of ghosts, right? If you've like, I have very famously said I will not buy a house that's built before like 1940 or that I knew somebody died in, because I'm not about that life, right? Like I'm not getting into ghost territory. And so you have these silly things. So for me, it would be my agent would know, like, hey, like, don't show me. I also have a history of like my house had water issues in the basement. Don't ever show me something that, even if it's been remediated, that's had water issues in the basement. That's so I asked them, hey, and this goes back to, especially if they're previous homeowners, what did you like and dislike about your current house? And what did you like and dislike about the process? I think that really can help you to start figuring out, because what we want to do is we want to, and sorry, one other thing, of course, you'd be shocked at how few lenders go over what closing costs are, what loan programs are available. So I give kind of a primer of that. And of course, we go over the process. I'm not going to talk about that because you guys all know what the buying process is. So, but let your buyers know what the process is. So, sorry, I want to get through all this because these are now the time-saving things. What we want to do is, I always say, we're sharpening the pencil, right? And if you're like me and you get down some of these YouTube holes and you watch that pencil sharpener, you are shaving off little bits that don't work until you get down to that fine point. And I explain that to the buyers. I say, we are going to whittle down kind of that chaff around that pencil so that we get to that very fine point, and that fine point's the perfect house for you. So how do we whittle it down? So the first thing is, like I said, obviously we want to pre-screen our buyers. We want to understand their motivations, and we want to understand as much as we can about the house. The other thing is we want to screen the properties themselves, because we know that the more properties we see, the less that we are making per hour. And Dave mentioned this in the chats earlier. We want to kind of take a look at if you're at all like the buyers that I have had, hey, even though we've got the portal set up, here's 10 Zillow links. I want to see all these properties. Okay. So, and I tell them that I'm going to do this. We're going to screen this. Number one, we're going to, and David mentioned it, we're going to check satellite view. So we're going to see, hey, does this back up to commercial? Is this on a main road? Have they expressed a preference, especially with rural buyers, on being gravel versus paved? Actually, let me take a quick detour for rural properties for 1 second, since I know some of you guys do them. Quick rural properties detour. Most rural buyers tend to be moving from the city, to use my wife's verbiage, to a rural property. Most of them have no understanding of what goes with that. So, hey, this is probably not going to be on a paved road. This is probably not going to have, city water and city sewer. You may not have natural gas. You may have propane. You may run into internet issues. That's huge with people that are working from home. And also, you may be in a situation where you're going to lose power more frequently. So asking about a lot of those questions can be, so if you ask, hey, what's your work situation? Do you work from home? Do you need specific high-speed internet? So especially as you get a little bit outside the norm, you can just talk, you can just interrupt me, JR.
Oh, I don't want to interrupt you. I just wanted, first time I ever came across this a couple of years ago, we were up, past Holly, and I had a couple that did patents for the Treasury office, so they could work from home, but they couldn't have Wi-Fi. They had to be hardwired. And so I actually had to find a subdivision, a brand new one. They had to be so many feet from the node of the of the cable, they couldn't be like 12 houses down. They only could be 6 because 6 was direct link and 7 was the Wi-Fi. It was really strange, man. I went through a lot of stuff with the cable company and everything, but it was interesting to know that they only could be so many feet from a node to get, because they could never be disconnected and they had to be hardwired.
It's a great point. And again, it's a great example of asking those questions. You might have showed them 30 houses without, and it wasn't working, or you might have gone under contract and they figured this out before finding out that this is why. Another great example of a why is finding out that, hey, it's not just that I want solid surface flooring because, it's an aesthetic. Hey, I've got, like for me, I have a big black lab. For me, having white carpet is going to make my life miserable. Some people have bad allergies. So having some of these things that are understanding and building the rapport and understanding your client really well. And I might ask, hey, we talk about their pets. I know a lot of you guys are pet owners and dog people are, I know obviously Lauren's a huge dog person. You understand how important your dogs are. Like if you saw Kim posted Izzy's birthday, like that's people's pets are a big part of their life. So understanding, hey, if you've got pets, I now have a list of questions I'm going to ask you. Does it change your flooring? Does it change whether you need a fence or not? So maybe that changes what HOAs we can look in. So it's again going from the why to the actual application of that, and also help having the understanding with that buyer that way we're not going to go out and see a house that's in hey, maybe they really need a privacy fence because they've got a big dog. And if you've got a buyer in Macomb Township, that might knock out half of the HOAs. And they might send you a listing. You say, nope, sorry, HOA doesn't allow privacy fences. And it's not that we're trying to minimize the amount of houses we see. It's that we're trying to see the right ones. We're not trying to minimize the amount of misses. And we tell them that. So back to screening the properties themselves. I always pull the disclosures. Hey, and some of this you can tell from looking at the pictures. You may be able to tell, does it need a roof? Is it going to need new HVAC? Are they going to need to put in a fence? Check the disclosures. What's the age of their HVAC? And if you've got a brand new buyer, explain to them, yes, our home warranty is great, but also understanding the limitations of home warranties. Hey, just so you know, and honestly, it may be a buyer that, hey, they're at $250,000 and the house needs a roof. And I explained to them, hey, this is $12,000. You amortize that every month. Hey, maybe we should look at something at $260 that might be in a little bit better shape. Or the reverse of that is true too. Obviously, if there's a virtual tour, a lot of these houses you should know well enough to kind of understand what the layout is. And so then I kind of just go through and say, hey, just so you know, I know you said you want open concept. It looks like that's closed off from the kitchen to the family room. Is that okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about having the conversations. The other thing I do is check against their criteria. So a lot of times Zillow, you've got to scroll way to the bottom to see the school district, to see if it has a basement. And then Zillow now also, concerningly, is combining all finished square footage. And that can be problematic because people aren't understanding that that's what they're seeing as total square footage. I know that this has gotten a lot of us in having some issues, but that total square footage number that Zillow's pulling through, you need to explain, no, you need to look at the above grade square footage number. And again, we've got enough tech tools to make this worthwhile. But let's talk a little about having that conversation with them, because I know it's hard to say no to your buyers. If you continuously see that you're getting listings that are just outside the criteria, Kim kind of mentioned this earlier, you need to have the conversation and say, hey, I have on my must list that you must have a basement. Has that criteria changed, and do we need to reevaluate? So you're not saying, no, we're not going to go see this house. We're saying, okay, you've told me don't show me anything with this. Has that changed? And most of the time the answer is, no, you're right. Let's not go look at that. But the answer might be, yeah, it's changed. And now maybe their needs have changed. Maybe they've gone through a couple houses and they thought they needed 1,500 square feet and they only need 1,200. That's all possible. So here's the other big key that really helps us save time. Stop showing properties. When you are going through the property, you are all experienced agents, and I'm sure that you can basically get a handle on whether this is a good property or not in the first like 2 or 3 minutes, if it even takes you that long. So instead of just being a glorified door opener and babysitter and saying, well, here's the kitchen. It's like, well, yeah, no shit. Like, we all know it's a kitchen, right? Sorry, I don't mean to be kind of mean there, but we all know it's a kitchen. So instead of saying, hey, here's the kitchen, or even asking, does this kitchen work for you? Does the size of this kitchen work for you? Maybe ask, hey, so what does your dining scenario look like? Do you guys eat out most of the time, or do you cook? If you cook, which one of you tends to cook more? If maybe wife was giving you a lot of opinions about the kitchen, but husband cooks more, or the reverse. Or maybe, husband is weighing in too much on something that the wife's like, hey, wait a minute, this is what I handle. Why do you care? And asking those why questions. If, hey, we've got, 5 kids and we're doing 1 million loads of laundry, and we know that we've got 5 kids, hey, would it be better for you to have first floor laundry because of this? Hey, what does your family situation look like? Do you guys tend to hang out together in the same room, or do you split off and go into bedrooms? Even silly things like, what are your closets like now? Or what size bed would you like to put in this? I know that seems silly that I'm asking them what size bed that they need. Well, but we all know follow my train of logic here. If we have a king size bed, and especially we have a king size bed and we need some larger closet space, means we're going to need at least a bare minimum of a 12 by 13 master bedroom, and realistically probably larger than that, which shows that we either need an anomaly of a larger, older property, or we probably need to look at something that's newer. And so I kind of take them down that rabbit trail. Hey, it's really important for you to have a master bathroom. Okay, generally speaking, you're going to be better off with a newer constructed property. And maybe I don't know if it would be helpful for you guys for me to put together a list of the questions we ask. Or if you guys would have questions that you ask that can help narrow down these buyer criteria, I think that's really, really helpful. So maybe I can put that together. And I'm trying to finish this up in the next couple minutes here. At the end of the showing, I always ask, so let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I say, hey, I am not here to sell you this house. I'm more of a matchmaker, right? So tell me what we liked, what we didn't like, and what is so horrific that never show me a house with this again. And that can sometimes just having those conversations going. I also, obviously, if you're in a house that's got cameras, please have these conversations outside. I don't want to be getting calls from other brokers yelling that you guys were criticizing their houses. The other thing I do is I have I think it was Lauren that does a rating from, I think 1 to 5.
Yeah.
And can you mention how that works for you? Because I thought it was so wonderful, and I can't remember the exact details of it.
Yeah. So kind of to your point about you've got, a couple, and maybe they're not seeing eye to eye on what's important to one or the other. So we see one house, and then I never do it with the first house because they have nothing to compare it to yet. Right. So we go to the first house, then we go to the second house. And then when we're wrapping up at the second house, I ask them to score the first house 1 to 5. 1 being, this was a total waste of time. There's no way I'd ever do this. 5, to your point earlier, Peter, too, was I would delete, my Zillow search for it. Like this checks all the boxes and then some, and I'm in. And what I do is I make them both say it at the same time. And then it kind of turns into like a funny game, but also then like they're not being swayed by the other one. And then sometimes it turns into a conversation like, oh, this is a 4 for you because this is a 1 for me. Okay, well, let's talk about why. And then that's sometimes too where like Kim's tip about, well, what kind of house did you grow up in? Like, are you expecting a ranch and he's expecting a colonial and bedrooms on the first floor? And then every time we see a new house, we rate it 1 through 5. And I keep track of it. And essentially I tell them, anything less than a 3, I'm essentially going to just rip up this paperwork, right? We're not moving forward with it. And then that's when we kind of get into the same thing about, well, if it's a 4 or 5 and you love it and you're serious about it and it works for your family, it works for you financially. Well, what if something better comes along? well, I mean, this one's a 4, you know, we've been looking for this long, you know, I kind of having all those conversations, but my clients tend to respond well to that because it's not really putting them on the spot, and it's forcing them to talk to each other to say, why is this a 5 for you and a 2 for me? Or, you know, well, I really need a bigger closet. Oh, well, that wasn't something we talked about before. And then it never fails that, like, if they ever do say the same number at the same time, we like kind of make like a big joke about it. And it's like, kind of just makes it a little bit more lighthearted that I'm not putting everybody on the spot to say, like, well, Peter, you don't want carpet, but this house has carpet and she says it's a 4. And like, then it's like, you know, I'm not trying to get people to fight with each other. They're good enough at that on their own. But yeah, I've had a lot of luck with that, especially with young couples or first time buyers who maybe haven't done this a lot and they haven't even really considered about like comparing the houses to each other, right? Because they're comparing it to what they see on TV, which is totally unrealistic.
Yeah, I also think, and this is kind of obviously this goes more towards if you're working with couples or families, be aware of the family dynamics and make sure everyone is heard. So for example, and also be sensitive to culture. So for example, there's a couple of cultures that we worked with when we were in like Sterling Heights, where it was expected that you were going to basically have the conversation of anything business related with the husband. And so you had to make sure that the wife's input is still being heard, and you have to do it in kind of a roundabout way. Or if you're not dealing with a situation like that, maybe you just happen to have where one of the personalities seems to be more dominant. Maybe the wife is making all the decisions here and you got to say, okay. And so make sure that you're going out of your way to have input from both, and also to understand, excuse me, that what we value as people shows up in our house. So if it is something that, hey, hey, we work from home, we really value this, we're going to make sure that neither party is feeling slighted because their concerns are being taken into account. Well, hey, you get to have your big kitchen, but I don't get to have my home office, right? We want to make sure that we're not actually causing more problems than we're fixing, if that makes sense. And so again, it goes back into asking those questions. So we'll talk really quickly about writing competitive offers. But I want to say, so if we are looking at saving time here, do you guys have on average, do you know how many houses you show per buyer? Because I'm sure I'll be able to find this. But does anybody know off the top of their head how many they tend to show per buyer? If not, I'll find it. But so if you could just reduce, so let's say that you work with, let's just say 5 buyers a year. If you can reduce by just 1 or 2 houses, that may save you 10 to 12 hours of time. To me, that's a good thing. If you can just have, by doing that additional 5 minutes of screening, if you can save yourself 2 hours of time, I think that's a real win. So I think that doing some of those screenings and just being willing to have those conversations and being able to remind the people of don't let yourself be walked on. Say, hey, this isn't in your criteria. But really it comes down to asking those questions. So I will try and put together a list of questions that are good to ask in both the consultation and your showings that can get you one step closer to getting them towards their offer. But let's also look at writing competitive offers here. So, and I wonder if, so real quick, one note. If we're looking, I just kind of checked. If our average house takes 14 showings for somebody to buy it, I think that's a nice we can reverse that and say, hey, maybe you're showing 14 houses on average. I don't think it's a bad average, but I will get that number. You might be astonished by it. All right.
Too, that market dictates sometimes how many, last summer, there were many people that were showing more homes than normal because their buyers weren't getting the houses. They were having to make 2, 3, 4 offers before they got a house. So it wasn't necessarily a buyer not knowing what they want or an agent not knowing the right questions. It was just the market.
You're absolutely right. And that has been, I think maybe the second biggest thing this year was the market conditions that caused you may have been showing a bunch of houses, but you may have been writing a bunch of offers too. So this comes down to, let's make sure we write competitive offers. Obviously, you can write a competitive offer and still have somebody else get their offer accepted, of course. And I think that in doing your duty as a fiduciary, sometimes that's going to be required of you to write an offer that you know is going to be rejected because you just refuse to put your client in a bad financial situation. And I tell them that, hey, I refuse to put you in a bad financial situation. Let's look at the most that this could appraise, right? So the first is, let's reduce buyer fear. So I prepare a CMA for every offer we write. Does it take a little bit more time? Yes. But if it causes me to not have to go show more, and obviously I'm not, if it's causing us to not have to go and show more houses and write another offer, it's worth the time. And we have a range on there. Here's what I think is a fair market value, and here's the most that this could possibly appraise for. And then obviously discussing the market conditions with them so that they understand what's going on. And then I think that the single most powerful conversation to have is, would you be willing to lose the house over X, right? Over X amount of dollars. I think that's incredibly important. I think that there is basically no conversation that you can have that's more, that really hits home for buyers, where they say, okay, wait a minute. And I amortize it out. I say, hey, $5,000 is, it's $17 a month. Are you willing to lose this house for $17 a month? And the answer might be yes. The answer might be no. Yeah. And David, you're exactly right. Are you willing to pay asking over appraisal to save your sanity over the next 6 months? That's a great way to put it. And I also think it can be, are you willing to pay a little bit more, like you said, to fulfill your motivating factor? So, hey, I need to move in 30 minutes. Hey, I need to be by my kid's school. Is it worth? And so go back to the motivation. Hey, I really want a property that I can hunt in my backyard. Hey, is it worth $17 a month to be able to hunt in your backyard, or $50 a month? So go back to those motivating factors. And I'm not saying that you should try and bid your clients up, but I'm saying this is a way to make sure that they're writing competitively. I think also, as I've mentioned before, you should also have the reverse conversations and make sure your clients don't screw themselves over. But I also think discussing terms with the buyers is very, very important. And we've already said this before, and this goes to getting your offers accepted. Have your lender reach out and have a good conversation with the agent. And by the way, if you are in a competitive situation, you'd like me to also reach out to the listing agent just to add, not that it would really add much, but just if it adds anything to it, I'd be more than happy to. But yeah, definitely have your lenders reach out. Definitely have that conversation with the agent. But I think that basically, hopefully these were a couple at least of time-saving tips. But if it comes down to the end of it, number one, ask the right questions and continue to ask, and then be aware when you're missing something. We can sometimes be blinded to our processes because we've asked the same questions a million times. I would encourage you this winter, take a look at the questions you ask. Take a look at your buyer consults. I'll try and put together a list of questions that I've used, but take a look. If you need any help with your buyer consult, please let me know. But so hopefully this was any additional tips that I might have missed that you guys like, any additional little kind of script things, anything that you guys have found that really helped you out. I'm really hoping that we can increase your dollar per hour this year. So anything that you guys would like to add to any of that? Cool. All right. Well, hey, hopefully this was helpful. I'll stop the recording. If you guys have any questions, I will try and make a Google Doc that will